Good evening, and welcome back to another episode of Friday Night Fireside Chats. I'm your host, Roy, and this is episode 2 of Friday Night Fireside Chats. And I realized I did not do this for the first episode, and so real quickly, I'll just cover the inspiration for this podcast came from the kind of events of 2020, having a lot more time to reflect and reevaluate and realign, and just to clarify some things. And out of some of that quiet and reflection, came up with this spontaneous idea to audio record some thoughts that I had on patience, discipline, and consistency, which was the topic of the first episode. And from there, I thought, you know what, why not continue with this? Why not continue just recording thoughts that I have on certain topics and share those with people in a format that my intention is to bring a degree of reflection, but also time to unwind and relax and become present after a week of work or busy events or whatever that has occurred from Monday to Friday. And that's pretty much it. And let's hop into this episode. Now, this episode is titled The Cookie Jar, and that comes from this idea that David Goggins came up with. Now, if you're not familiar with who David Goggins is, he is an ex-Navy SEAL, and he is also commonly known as the hardest man alive. And he has a book out called Can't Hurt Me, and there's also an audiobook version. I would highly recommend both, as the audiobook version it's very unique. I believe they did something that has never been done before, which is audiobook combined with a podcast style. And so he has somebody else reading his book, and then at the end of each chapter, he and that person just have a dialogue on the contents of that chapter. And it's really probably one of the most enjoyable audiobooks that I have listened to. And the physical copy itself will have some images that obviously you can't see in the audiobook, which is why I recommend getting both to have a full experience of this man's life. Now, the cookie jar is something that David Goggins developed, and the concept of the cookie jar is there are times in life where we might find ourselves more in, I guess, a slump, and we might have doubts, imposter syndrome, and begin to really question if we have the capability, if we're worthy, and things along those lines. Now, the cookie jar is this, you could make it an actual physical thing or more so an imaginary thing, but it's basically this container for all the triumphs you ever had. And the way Goggins speaks about it is that in some of the most difficult points in our lives, all of us can have a tendency to, in his words, forget just how badass we are. And so the cookie jar is a reminder of that. And so for him, he describes it as kind of this mental slip of paper he puts in this jar. And on those slips of paper is a reminder of moments in his life where he has overcome and conquered an obstacle, something that he had never anticipated that he would have, but he did it. And so each of those slips of paper in that cookie jar is essentially just a resume of all the times that he has completed something, all the times he has conquered and accomplished something. And to call on those resources as a reminder in present day moments when he meets a specific challenge or needs a reminder of who he is, what he has accomplished. Now, my recommendation would be that it's a helpful exercise to just journal out all of these things. Because thinking about it mentally, well, you can build kind of a memory bank of those things. Sometimes it's nice just to have a physical place that you can turn to. Like, all right, page 8 of this journal has a list of my cookie jar. And I took some time to think about some of those moments for myself. I have 2 stories that I'll share with you all. And perhaps they might remind you of similar moments in your life where you faced your fears or accomplished something. The first story I'll start with is a story of romance or attempted romance. And so what happened here was in my, I think it was either junior or senior year of college, I became enamored with this Japanese girl who was an exchange student from Japan, and just completely obsessed with this girl. Did everything I could to get close to her. This whole like, oh, I hope she likes me. Let me find all the ways to win her approval and attention. And it was, looking back, at this, I can easily see how, all right, that was not the healthiest thing for me. But at the time, I didn't know any better, and I think that's sometimes where we learn our greatest lessons. But anyways, absolutely obsessed with this girl. It came to the end of her exchange program. The year was up, and so she was obviously returning to Japan. And I was talking to one of the teaching assistants for my Japanese class. And at this time, I was learning very basic introductory Japanese. And through talking with him, I was inspired to purchase a plane ticket to Japan and go see her that summer. Now, some of the context for this is that is something I would have never done before. And it's honestly, like, up until that point, I pretty much, avoided anything that was new or strange or outside of my comfort zone. And that was also my first time, ever flying on an international flight to a country I had never been before, and one where I could just barely speak the language. But in that case, romance was enough to kind of conquer those fears. And I was like, anything that I need to do, like, I'm going to do it if I can win her heart. Obviously not paying attention to all the times that clearly it was a one-way street. It was a love unrequited. And when I had shared that with her, she's like, yeah, it's okay if you come visit, but as friends. And even at that time, I still didn't get it. The message just didn't come through. I was like, yeah, sure. But in my mind, I was thinking, I'm not going to give up. She's just saying that. But once I actually arrive in Japan, like, she'll see, and she'll change her mind. None of that was the case anyways. But I did end up going to Japan that summer, purchased a ticket, and went there for, I think, 2 or 3 weeks. So it was a good amount of time. And again, the first time traveling internationally on my own. And by the time that trip arrived, like, I was no longer infatuated with her. And so I just took it as like, you know what? Things didn't work out. She didn't feel the same way. Perfectly fine with that now. And I just took it as like, you know what? I already bought this ticket. I already contacted other friends that I met who had the same exchange program. And I'm not just going to say, you know what, I'm not going to go to Japan anymore, because honestly, I was only going because I was hoping, to win the heart of this girl. That just seemed like a, I don't know, pretty lame thing to do. And so I was like, you know what, I'm going to go. I'm going to follow through with this plane ticket. I don't care that I no longer have the same feelings for this girl, and I'm excited to visit this country that I have never been to, but have been learning about, and visit some of the friends that I had made when they were at my university. Like I had mentioned before, romance and excitement at this point had overcome the anxiety of doing something new and completely foreign. But the part where kind of that anxiety and fear of failure and shame came up was when I went to a convenience store for the first time in Japan. In my mind, it was just going to be a simple thing. I'm just going to pick out some food for lunch. I pay the money, and that's it. And just some of the basic greetings would be enough, of like, hello and thank you. That's all I needed. Unfortunately, the convenience store I went to, I purchased a obento, which is just a kind of Japanese lunch, pre-prepared lunch. And this was one that they could microwave for you. Now, I didn't know that because I was staying at a friend's house who was very kind enough to host me, and she had a microwave. So I thought, I'm just going to take it home and microwave it. But the checkout clerk there asked me, "Atatame ka?" which means, would you like to heat this up? Now, I did not know what that meant at the time. Again, I was only familiar with your basic greetings and some simple sentences and grammar. And so that was a vocabulary word that I did not know. So I just looked at him and I was like, and then he said it 2 more times. And the last time he just had a very confused expression on his face. And then he pointed to the microwave and I was like, oh, okay. And I was like, okay, yeah, hi, yes. But at that time, I was just feeling completely just ashamed and embarrassed. Face was maybe red, but certainly feeling just so much heat in my face. And I actually walked out before he even handed my obento back to me. And he actually had to call me as I was walking out the door. I was like, hey, you almost forgot what you came here to buy. So adding more embarrassment. And I took the meal home to my friend's place, and she was at work at the time, so I was just there by myself, and ate the meal and just told myself, you know what, I'm not going out. I'm not going out for the rest of the day. I don't want to do that anymore. I just feel so embarrassed. And I think some time went by. Watched some Japanese television that I didn't understand, and then I was like, you know what, no, I'm gonna head out again. Like, I'm gonna face my fear. I'm not gonna just stay inside cooped up for the rest of the day waiting until my friend comes home. Like, I'm gonna push myself, because dang it, I purchased this ticket, and I didn't come here just to stay cooped up in a friend's house for the remainder of this trip. And so I upped the ante. So instead of going to a convenience store to buy another obento, I said, I'm actually going to go to a restaurant where I will likely have to say or ask some more things. So let me make it a challenge. And I went to a ramen noodle shop, and inevitably something came up. I was hoping it would just be a simple, because in Japan, many of the places where you order food, it's almost like a vending machine. You put in the amount of money, and then you select a button that selects which meal that you want, and then you hand that to the person, and they prep your meal. You don't really have to open a menu and say, hey, this is what I would like. So I gave them the ticket, and then they asked me, what kind of noodles did I want? Did I want the noodles hard? Did I want them soft? And again, vocabulary words that I did not know. And I just ended up saying, sumimasen, like, I'm sorry. And the guy there was kind enough to just like, all right, just wait a moment. And he grabbed maybe another staff member or a manager. And the guy comes up to me, and he's like, I knew they were talking about noodles, but that was it. And he was like, hado, softo. So like hard or soft. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah. I'll have the soft noodles. And then successfully, got over the embarrassment, ate my meal, thanked them, went back. And then by that time, my friend had returned from work, and I shared to them the whole story of the embarrassment at the convenience store and then going to the restaurant. And I was pretty proud of myself. I was like, look at that. Like, I experienced something very uncomfortable for me, very embarrassing, and had pretty much resigned to the fact that, you know what, like, I can't do this. I'm just going to stay inside. And then facing that fear. And so that's the first story of this piece of paper I have in my cookie jar that is a reminder. Like, hey, I deliberately faced my fear here, and even had a funny story to tell about it. Like, now looking back, it's a very fun memory. And now the second story goes back a little bit further. Middle school. So in middle school, I was in swimming classes. I was enrolled in swimming classes, and the thing that I was most afraid of and could not do was jump off a diving board. The diving board just felt too scary to do. I didn't want to have any of it. And it was, I think, the last day of the swimming classes before break. And the instructor had us all, go on the diving board as the last activity. And this was probably either the second or third time she had us do this. All the previous times I chickened out. And this last time, like there was some conviction of like, okay, I'm gonna do this, and I was the first person to actually walk onto the diving board. So there was something within me that was like, I'm gonna do this. Like I gotta do this. I can do this. And then the moment I stepped on the edge of that diving board with all its wibble wobble, shaking, and then looking down, that immediately evaporated, and I just stood there, looking at the bottom. And she had said, she was asking like, "Do you know how to swim?" Obviously a rhetorical question, and I answered back. I was like, "Yes." She's like, "Okay, then you can jump, and I can catch you. If anything bad happens." But she was a little bit. To me, it looked like far out and back from where I would hit the water if I jumped. And so I was like, "But you're not right below me. How are you going to catch me?" And she was like, "Well, I can't be below you, right? Because it's like, that's not going to be good for me if you just land on top of me. So I have to be back here, and I'll swim towards you if anything, wrong happens." And I wasn't convinced, so I stood there for a few more seconds, and then, oh man, just this long walk of shame. The diving board's not that long, but it felt like, minutes from me to walk from the edge back and off the diving board. And I just sat there watching as all the other kids jumped in without hesitation. And it was not a pleasant feeling. Did not feel good about myself at all. Then fast forward, so that was middle school. Fast forward to, I don't know, this was like in the middle of grad school. So over 10 years later, at the very least. Over 10 years later, I finally face that fear. And what this was, it was just a simple outing with friends. Went to a lake, and there is a public diving area with a lower diving board and a higher diving board. And the moment I saw it, and I think much of what also allowed me to get to this point was, one, just time. Between that middle school experience and this grad school experience, like there was never any other occurrence of going near a diving board or even swimming that much. And so this was, also due to my grad school program in counseling psychology. I kind of understood more of my own psyche. So I had really worked through a lot of things, especially fear and shame. And so when I saw that diving board at the lake with my group of friends, I was like, you know what? Like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to redeem myself. Like, I'm out for redemption this time for what I could not do when I was in middle school. And so I went out with, I think there's 2 other friends who joined me. We went to the diving boards. I did the lower diving board. And this was, I think, in a way, perhaps more scary than doing it at a pool where there's a lifeguard literally right there and the one who's taught me how to swim. There was a lifeguard present here too, but I don't know. Maybe the water being darker, so I can't see the bottom, whereas in a swimming pool you can see the bottom. That was another factor that made it feel scarier, like jumping into a dark abyss. But as I was on that diving board, I told myself, I know how to swim. So I was reminding myself of that question my swimming instructor in middle school asked me. It's like, I know how to swim, so I know how to survive. And it probably helped that there were like little kids around me. So I was like, all right, come on. Like, you got to do this. You can't just not jump now. You're freaking in grad school and there's little kids here who are jumping off this diving board. So I did it. I was like, all right, great. But it wasn't quite enough because my eyes were now set on the higher diving board, um, way higher than the one back in middle school and swimming class. And I was like, that's what I'm going to jump off from. Like, if I can do this, man, am I going to conquer a huge fear. And so I lined up, and there was somebody in front of me who probably was a middle school kid as well. So it's kind of interesting how it kind of almost like there's like this full circle, myself back in middle school and now a middle schooler in front of me. And he was afraid to start climbing the ladder onto this higher diving board. It's just so fascinating. I recognized that in the moment, but now I'm just remembering it again. And he was like very hesitant about it. So I was like, you know what? Like, let me go. Like, I'll go first. And he was fine with that. And I think I tried to say something encouraging. I don't remember what I said. But I climbed up there, walked to the edge of that diving board, and I was like, ooh, this is pretty high up there, for me anyways. And then again, like, I jumped off the lower diving board. I can do this. And so I jumped off, and wow, like, obviously it being the first time, I had no reference for it, but it felt like it took me ages to hit the water. And when I was falling, I was like, why haven't I hit the water? Why haven't I hit the water? Finally, I hit the water, come back up, and just this huge feeling of, I don't know how to describe it. I didn't feel heavy. Like, I felt light. I felt expansive, energized. Because here I had finally did it, you know, with all this time in between middle school and now as a grad school student. I finally faced my fear of jumping off a diving board. And I even upped the ante by jumping off the higher one. And later on, I went cliff diving with a friend. And that, again, stirred up some of that old fear, but ended up jumping off the cliff, the highest I ever jumped off from, and it was great. But again, there was so much anxiety building up of watching other people jump like it was nothing, walking up there and then looking down and being like, oh God, I don't know. I don't think I can do this. But then finally doing it. And as I share these two stories, I mean, it's a great feeling even just talking about them, because they are clear-cut moments to myself, definitively in my life, where I can look back and say, here were two instances where I faced discomfort, I faced my fear, and I walked through it. Very much as with the cookie jar example that David Goggins created, it's something I have in a container for me to pull out and remind myself in any moment where, once again, I feel that same tension, I feel that same anxiety or fear, doubt of like, come on, Roy, like you've done some things, and these things are a testament to your ability to face your fear. And so, yeah, that's the story. Those are the stories. And I hope they remind you of moments in your life, whether it's something similar or completely different, but that this topic and the stories that I've shared are an opportunity for you to reflect and think of moments in your life where you faced your fear, you moved out of your comfort zone. And as you recall those moments, to remember what that felt like, what it felt like to conquer your fear. And have this recollection of all that you're capable of. And I think the way I view our human journey is that it's more so a process of unfolding like a lotus. Not so much trying to add more things into our lives, but through experiences, relationships, we're really just unfolding and discovering more about ourselves and returning to our essence, returning to a core essence that is so much larger and more expansive than we might have dared to believe if we just live within the small bounds of a container of saying, this is what is safe and familiar, and I can only live within these bounds. So that's all for tonight. Thank you for tuning in and listening, and may you have a restful Friday night and a good weekend. If you would like to learn more about the work that I do and follow any of the social media handles, you can visit my website at www.sacredwildman.com. We'll have the links to any social media. I also have some resources there where you can learn more about what I do. And if you would like to support my work, there's also a place on my homepage that you can donate if you would like. And with that, have a good night.